Hey, everybody. Uh, okay. Hi. Hi, Anne. I think that's you. Hi. All right. I made a little announcement earlier on my Instagram stories that I was gonna do a Instagram Live, my first one ever. I even got dressed up for the occasion. I hope you like that. And what I thought I would do is, I, like many people, are struggling with, this week's events, the event in Central Park, where we had another incident of kind of, calling the cops on just being black and among other things, and also then another unarmed black person murdered by the police, and then just all that's transpired since then. And as a white person, I'm trying to figure out what I can do and in this in the contemporary times that we are living in. And so, one of the things I thought I could do was talk to other white people about white identity. And the reason I think this is important is because I think we're having a hard time struggling with owning our whiteness, right? And how that plays out in the world and the effects it has on people in the world. And in the past I've been in like multicultural classes, and where many of the white students would never even identify as white. They would be like, "Well, I'm Irish," or "I'm not white. I'm whatever, name the ethnicity," or while benefiting from whiteness, but we'll get there. Or "I'm American." I'd hear a lot of that, and the problematic statement of "I don't see race," and that's fine, and I'm going to talk about that too, because I was there once too, right? I'm not, and I want to make sure that we're not. I hope I don't cast blame or whatever, but I want to talk about how we develop through our white identity to a place where we can be really effective as anti-racists. So, and it's not to knock being American or being Irish or Italian or whatever you might be. Those principles that were born out of those cultures and the legacies that were passed through those cultures are very, very much important. But oftentimes it does not acknowledge our whiteness and the effects of our whiteness in the world, and how we benefit from the whiteness, and how we keep white supremacy going by not acknowledging our whiteness. So, what I thought I would do today, and I'll try to, be kind of quick, but bear with me. But I'm going to go through the Hardiman White Identity Development Scale, which I've used in the past to kind of tell my own story of white identity. And it's a scale, Hardiman, Hardiman, if you want to look it up, and maybe even lay your own experience on the developmental stages. And for all my post-structuralist friends, I'm using a categorized stage for this. You can just take a back seat in the moment and let me do this. But so the Hardiman stage starts with I always such a hard time with this word, naive stage, right? So, and this is like the beginnings of our lives, And for me, I was born into a sea of whiteness in Huntington Beach. And I should let you know that I'll have questions. I'll make some space for questions at the end of this. So I saw that Natasha had a question what it was called. It's the Hardiman White Identity Development Scale or stages. But anyway, in the nativity stage, for me, I was born into Huntington Beach. I was born in a sea of whiteness, right? And what it says here is that this is the stage where we are born into this world innocent, open, and unaware of racism and the importance of race, right? And so that was me being born and growing up in Huntington Beach. It was, like I said, a sea of whiteness. There was no people of color that I recall, why I can remember it this way is because I remember the first time a Vietnamese student came to our school. I was in my elementary school, and that was the time, I'm going to date myself now, but that was the time of the boat people, as they were referred to, but it was a young Vietnamese student came to our school, and it was quite a stir. Like, we had this exotic person coming to our school, and so that was my first experience of like a person of color, and then did not think about race at all in all of that, right? And or the effects of, or what that experience might have been. And then there was another Indian student that came in, and then so there was this. They were just being kind of assimilated, right? And we didn't think about, or at least I wasn't thinking about the importance of race or what their experience might be coming into this sea of whiteness, right? And so it could be characterized that I was very much unaware of race at that time, growing up in my elementary school years. So the Hardiman scale then moves to the acceptance stage. In the acceptance stages, this is a stage where it's marked by a conscious belief in the democratic ideal that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed in a free society, and those who fail must bear the responsibility of their failure. So this, in a nutshell, is meritocracy. This is what we, at least in my location, what I was taught, that if you work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then the world is yours. And if for some reason you fail, that's a statement about your character, right? Or who you are as a person. And embedded in all of that, and this still goes on today, right? And there's still a lot of people that subscribe to that ideal. And but what it doesn't contain is any larger social awareness, right? So this was when I would probably rate myself around, this was, 7th or 8th grade, my junior high school years, where I was kind of, and I was really interested in, maybe people like John Wayne or something. I grew up with that giant John Wayne ideal, that you just be tough and you work hard and you'll be okay. And it doesn't matter. Social context, does not matter at all, or whatever's going on, or what race you are, or whatever. I had no social awareness of any of that stuff. I bought into the American ideal. I was sold on meritocracy. If I work hard enough, I'll be okay. And so that's the second stage of the Hardiman, a white identity stage. So then we get to the interesting part, and then this is what is known as the resistance stage. And the resistance stage in this, in the Hardiman white identity development scale, is the white person. It starts with the white person's denial system begins to crumble because of a monumental event or a series of events that not only challenge but shatter the individual's denial system. And it goes on to say racial realities of life in the United States can no longer be denied. And how this happened for me was I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and I was drinking beers in the park with some friends. And there was a guy I grew up with. His name is Scott Miller. He's dead now. He was actually assassinated by his own gang, but he ended up becoming the co-founder of what is arguably the largest skinhead gang in the country now, Peni, Public Enemy #1. And one day we were all in the park drinking beers, and Scottish, who was just at that time was kind of, when I was growing up with him, blonde-haired surfer kid, just kind of prototypical Huntington Beach stereotype, and which, skinheads are Huntington Beach prototypical stereotype at this point. But he rolled up on his bike, and we were all sitting there drinking beers, and he said, "Hey, you want to see my new tattoo?" And I was like, okay. And so what he did is he rolled up his sleeve and he showed me this like large black swastika that he tattooed. And he must have been same age as me, 14 or 15 years old at that time. Large black swastika on his arm. And I had seen that, and I was like, if I look back going on the scale, that was when something happened to me. Like when I realized, like, oh, wait a minute, I know of like Nazis, and I know of like from World War II, and like playing army as a kid, and they were the bad guys, and but all of a sudden you had this white surfer kid with a swastika tattooed on his thing, and like I said, he went on to become quite notorious, um, and um, and yeah, and so it just kind of, that was the beginning of this stage that kind of opened things up for me. And then at that time too, in Huntington Beach, there was quite a scandal because we had a former concentration camp guard living in Huntington Beach that they had found out about. And so there was this kind of thing that started to happen that I began to realize. It goes on to the resistance stage. The final point in the resistance stage is the person becomes conscious of being white and is aware they harbor racist attitudes and begin to see the pervasiveness of oppression in our society. And I would mark that point, like I said, I would mark that point as the beginning of me entering into the experience of a white identity and beginning to see that there's this thing going on, that there's racism and stuff like that. Um, and, um, and that's and that was a long period of years, right? And so that was a long period of years. I had a counterbalance to that too. And I want to say this. I didn't grow up in what I remember as a racist home, right? I'm sure we had racist ideals, but the first black person I'd ever seen in my memory was in my own home, and it was my father's colleague friend. And I grew up with my father, who taught at Cal State Long Beach, and he taught in the Park and Recs department. And a lot of these were kids that were going to go into inner cities and for nonprofit work and do that kind of thing. And he made everybody read the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? And this was in the 70s, so there wasn't a lot of the anti-racist literature that we have now. There was, James Baldwin and like books like that and stuff. But so I had this other counterbalance of my father. Like the N word was never used in my home growing up. So there was this kind of thing, but I did begin to experience like my own racism, or how I would hear other people with their racism. I've since come to learn a lot of the kids that I grew up with hold some pretty extreme ideals and ideas, and so that was the beginning of this kind of stage. And in Huntington Beach has kind of been where I grew up. Is we just had these protests, the Open the State, protest here, the alt-right folks have been coming here and doing their thing, and there's been a long history of kind of some racist undertones in the community that I live in. And before I started my master's program to become a therapist, I served on, and I'll talk about this. This is we'll get to the redefinition stage in a minute, but I served on the Human Relations Task Force. And before I had to resign because I was going to grad school to become a therapist. But one of the last things we were dealing with was white supremacists were putting flyers out on people's lawns in Huntington Beach, and so that thing is still in our community, right? So anyway, so that was the resistance stage. This is where you get woken up to, where I got woken up to. My denial systems about race, my own racism, my own seeing how people are oppressed. I grew up, I was here for the Rodney King, the riots after the Rodney King incident, and all of that stuff. And so that's all part of the redefinition stage, where it's kind of this struggle where this, like I said, the person no longer denies being white. That's redefinition stage. So the person becomes conscious of being white, is aware that they harbor racist attitudes, and begin to see the pervasiveness of oppression in our society. So then what happened next for me is, then this is where, in the Hardiman scale, this is where the redefinition stage. And this stage is where the person no longer denies being white, honestly confronts one's racism, understands the concept of white privilege, and feels increased comfort in relating to persons of color. So, and how this happened for me, I'm going to mark it. I mean, like I said, I was serving, before I even started grad school, I was serving on the Human Relations Task Force at the City of Huntington Beach. I was trying to begin to do some things to acknowledge my whiteness in some ways, or try to do something to make some change in the world. But what I would say was most fundamentally changing for me was I started my master's program at Pepperdine University, and it's embarrassing to say in some ways I was in my 40s, right? This is how long it took. I was in my 40s, so don't be ashamed if you're just coming onto these ideals now, right? But I was in my 40s, and I acquired a mentor. Fortunately, I acquired a mentor, and I did it because I got a flyer when I started at my master's program. I saw a flyer for something called the Social Justice Collaborative, and it really sounded interesting to me, and I thought it would line up with some of the things that I was trying to do or be a part of or whatever. And so I went to this the first meeting of the Social Justice Collaborative, and I met what turned out to be my mentor at the time, and still really is, Dr. Amy Tuttle at Pepperdine University, and she was 10 years younger than me, woman of color, and became my mentor. And through that practice, I began to relate with persons of color more. I began to honestly confront my own racism. I began to learn about white privilege and white fragility, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end of here. And when I went through all the things that we go through, like, well, I'm not a bad guy. We do that kind of denial thing, like, not all white people, right? Well, yeah, we know it's, but I did all that stuff, right? And I did all that stuff, and but it was just it was a wonderful, it still is. I mean, this is a learning that is in process, but it was, and sometimes you get really destabilized. I understand how you can move into positions of guilt or shame or denial, because it's, when confronted with whiteness and how that operates in the world, and white supremacy. And it's easier sometimes, and we'll talk about this in white fragility, just to turn away from it all, because it is hard. But it's not about you. It's about, but you have to learn these things. You have to see how it operates in the world. And it is an uncomfortable process. And I think that's probably why a lot of people don't want to do it. But you can get through to the other side, and you can continue to make mistakes. And people have always been gracious with me. And so I know it's hard, but it has to be done. Our world depends upon it. So the final stage of the Hardiman white identity scale is the internalization stage, and this is where with greater comfort in understanding oneself, the development of what they say is a non-racist. I would say actually no, you need to be an anti-racist. The development of an anti-racist white identity comes a commitment to social action as well. And like I said, I've had periods of social action in my life, and so that's what's happened now. I have more comfort in my whiteness, who I am in the world, my interest in, trying to make change in the world, try to account for my own whiteness, and that includes a commitment to social action. And some of the ways that I'm doing that, and there's still a lot to do. And one of the things that just prompted this, and this isn't it, but one of the things that prompted it is just that I want to do more. There's so much more work to do. And I know Anna just said, we owe it to the people of color to do it because it's harder for them and more painful for them. And I'll say something about that, Anna. Thank you for that. It's one time I did my first YouTube video and if you should go check it out. I did a white fragility, white privilege video a few years ago. And when I started to get comments, I started to get like very critical comments. People were, they're trolls. They come at you. And I remember thinking, oh, this YouTube thing, that's kind of crazy. I don't want to, be part of that. And because of that hurt my feelings, right? That white fragility showed up, that hurt my feelings. These people hate me because I'm talking about white privilege and white fragility. And then I realized, like, oh man, wait a minute. Women, people of color, women of color, the LGBTQ community, all of them have to put up this shit every day. So it's not too tall an order for me to go take my beating too. Go out there and try to take my beating. So, and thanks, Anna, Natasha, for think it's a great video. And hi, Brian. Good to see you. I'm gonna promote our thing in a minute. So anyway, so the internalization stage is so with greater comfort and understanding oneself and the development of an anti-racist white identity comes a commitment to social action as well. And Brian, who just kind of quoted on there, last year we did a thing. Well, he really did a thing. I'm going to pull it up where we at California Family Institute we did a film and a kind of discussion around what he titled "Don't Fear Me, Respect Me," and we did a showing of When They See Us, the Netflix docuseries, which you all should watch if you have not seen it. And Brian and I are planning to do some sort of anti-racist workshop at California Family Institute coming up. So stay tuned for that. But let's talk a little bit about white fragility, because I just did mention it, and it is going to come up, and it is going to hit you. And white fragility, is this idea that white people in North America live in a social environment that protects and insulates them from race-based stress. And so what we're experiencing now with what's happening in Minnesota and what's happened this week in Central Park and the murder again of another unarmed black man is race-based stress. And it's really easy for us as white people to turn away from it. And that is white privilege and white fragility in action. And what I'm kind of asking is that we don't insulate ourselves from this, that we feel it. And this is, me trying to feel it. And because it is easier for us as white people to turn away from it and not have to deal. And that's the truth. And that's white privilege. And so what are some other things? So what are some of the defensive moves if we're going to be participating in white fragility? Is changing the subject, calling race talk negative, leaving difficult conversations. I think this is the most prominent one. Even on social media or whatever, we can disappear. And so we need to be able to hang in with a little more tolerance about sitting in difficult conversations. Getting defensive or angry. My life hasn't been easy. I remember and this is a common quote I get, like on one of my videos I got, people make these judgments about me. They don't know what my life is like. My life hasn't been easy. Listen, my life hasn't been easy either. I've struggled in various ways, and but my white skin has not made my life. It has not made my life hard. Where that has done it for, but where race makes it real hard in our country for other people. So being white is the one thing. As a matter of fact, I remember I was a high school dropout. I remember when I learned about white privilege, I went back to a time where I got a job at a Fortune 500 company. I put on a suit and tie. I was a high school dropout. They'd heard about me because I'd had some success and they were kind of recruiting me from another company. But the thing is because I looked the part that they were looking for, and I know this in my core today, they didn't reference check me. They didn't check my education. I just looked the part. And I know I got that job at a Fortune 500 company where, typically you would need like education, like a bachelor's degree at least, or something like that. And it made my professional life take off because I got that job. Would a person of color had that same experience? I 99% guarantee you that it would not. And because of my whiteness, I was able to do that. And I will stand by that. But getting defensive or angry, my life hasn't been easy. That's another defensive move of white fragility. And of course, getting lost in white guilt. It isn't about blame or shame. This isn't about blame or shame. We blame or shame is just going to enable us inactive, right? And it's going to not help anybody. So this isn't about that. We need to, as white people, we need to be out there. And so it's not about guilt. I've never had a person of color come up to me and tell me whatever about who I was as a white. Never. And as long as I've shown up and not centered myself and tried to help and be a listener and do those kinds of things, all is well. And as a matter of fact, when I've made mistakes and and have been called on them by people of color, Brian knows of one specifically, another colleague of ours, where I made a mistake in a group of people, and she took me aside and called me on it. And she was just gracious in the whole thing. And it wasn't about shaming me or producing guilt or anything like that. It was just about helping me be a better person. And that's all it is. So, okay. And yeah, so that's it. I like I said, I have some video on white privilege and white fragility on YouTube. You have to look for the Radical Therapist on YouTube, and it's up there. And does anybody have any quick questions before I close out? I've been going almost half an hour. I don't know how long you're supposed to go on these things, but that was my story in a nutshell, according to the Hardiman white identity development model. And I would ask that maybe you guys Google the Hardiman white identity development model and kind of lay your own life experience on that and see where you're at in the process or where you need to be. And also maybe read, there's a ton of literature to read. I'm thinking of Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, since we just talked about that, and that's where I took most of this stuff from anyway. And of course, the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, I think it's Ibram Zendi. But there's a ton of literature on your social media. You're seeing a lot of stuff you can read, or just shoot me an email and I can give you some suggestions as well. Any quick questions? Was this helpful? Can you give me a thumbs up if it was useful, worthwhile? Yeah, thanks. Okay, I'm waiting to see if there's any more questions. I'm going to close this off. And what I'm going to do, thanks, Carrie. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to, if you think it would be helpful for other people, please share it. Or maybe we'll do more of these and we can keep the conversation going. And that would be great. So I'm going to save it. Please watch it again. Share it with somebody. Hi, Justine. And Talia, good to see you. And that's it. So thank you, everybody. Show up, do your work. Don't let white fragility get you. And we'll keep the convo going. Yes, Michelle, we'll keep the convo going. And maybe I'll do more of these. This was fun. This was kind of cool. I was a little nervous in the beginning. I've never done a live thing before, but this was kind of fun. So, and look out for Brian, Brian.thetherapist. He's on here right now. Go like him. He and I are going to be doing an anti-racist workshop of some kind at California Family Institute. And so we'll be spreading the word. And if you see that pop up somewhere, please spread the word and even join us. It's going to be, like I said, no blame, shame, no guilt. We're going to have, might be some difficult conversations for sure, but that's what we need to do. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. It will be replayable. Please watch it again, and we'll chat at you later. Bye.